Episode 3. Act 1. When Lily left. Some departures begin with doors, some with trains, some with arguments. This one began with a tension. It began when a girl realized that the world had started to look at the boy she loved the way bright things look at flame, not to warm themselves, but to see what will burn. Lily had always known Alex before the crowd did. She knew him when the machines were only a murmur and not yet a choir. She knew the ordinary edges of him, how he moved through rooms like someone who had already mapped their exits, how he rested his hands on tables as if listening through wood, how he saved his loudest laughter for moments that would not be photographed by anyone's memory but hers. The legend that would gather around him later would edit those parts away. Legends do that, they leave only the shine. After the day the city remembered to wait, the shine found him. Doors lingered, lights softened, devices behaved. The world bent gently toward the shape of his care. People told the story with reverence or suspicion, depending on their appetite for control. Lily listened to both versions and measured them against the boy who still untied knots in headphone cables with a patience that belonged to an older craft. The versions did not match. She understood then that love, when it is true, lives between competing stories and refuses to choose. The harmonizer arrived, and with it a new posture. Alex stood straighter. The ache behind his eyes eased. He wore the band like a crown no one else could see. The city, in response, lowered its voice to an inside tone. To Lily, this was mercy. To the crowd, it looked like rise. The difference matters in private and not at all in public. Publics prefer to name ascent and call it destiny. They rarely name difficulty and call it cost. She watched him change, because change is what children do when the future insists. He did not become cruel. He became distant in a way that had nothing to do with geography. The distance was not punishment, it was pressure management. He learned to ration attention the way doctors ration oxygen, and Lily felt it even when he did not intend her to. Where once she had occupied a permanent seat at the front of his mind, she now shared the row with alarms, grids, and the constant tug of systems that wanted from him what only he could give, the arbitration of their appetite. She kept drawing. It was what she had always done. Long before the world broke itself into screens, she filled pages with small domestic mythologies in which kettles behaved and lifts kept their promises. Sometimes she drew him, but only from the corners, his shoulder, his hands, the nape of his neck, because to draw his face felt like claiming something the world already wanted to own. She carried her sketchbook the way some people carried charms. It did not protect her from anything except the belief that she was powerless. As the months folded, attention hardened. There were sightings and near sightings quoted like scripture. A classmate swore the streetlights along the canal brightened when he passed. A neighbor insisted the laundry room machines hushed themselves when he entered. A stranger on a bus posted a grainy video in which nothing much happened, and it was watched 1,000,000 times for that reason alone. The city's appetite for signs is inexhaustible. It will eat ordinary days and call them prophecies if it needs to. With attention came its shadow. Suspicion accumulated like dust on the edges of story. Institutions rehearsed their questions in rooms that smelt of carpet and old coffee. People who had never met him said his name with the careful diction reserved for storms and saints. Lily learned to hear the difference between curiosity and hunger. Curiosity asks to understand. Hunger asks to own. Hunger was winning. None of this changed how she loved him. It changed what loving him required. Love, when it discovers that the world wants what it loves for itself, must decide whether to stand in the doorway or step aside. She was not made for doorways. She was made for light and for leaving rooms before walls taught her to be smaller than she is. Days developed a new choreography. In class, her hands learned to draw, while her ears learned the pitch of Alex's fatigue. In the street, she walked half a pace off to ease his path through the currents of signal only he could feel. In the evenings, when the city's choir collapsed to a tired hum, and the harmonizer still glowed faint against his wrist, she studied not the tech of him, but the cost. The cost was simple. Each kindness to the world took a little more of him. He paid in attention. He paid in sleep. He paid in the incremental erosion of spontaneity that happens to those who must manage everything they touch. She tried to offer him a place untouched by demand. She failed as the world fails at peace, honestly, then habitually. Peace cannot be manufactured in the same space where a person is required to be a boundary for everyone else. It must be elsewhere. Elsewhere is not always a location. Sometimes it is a decision. The decision did not arrive as a speech or a deadline. It arrived as a pile of small, common moments that, stacked, became a shape. A morning in which the kettle's delay felt like a message to her, not to him. An afternoon in which the city's patience toward a stranger in the crosswalk felt more intimate than his own. A night in which she realized she had watched him sleep, not because she was charmed by quiet, but because she needed evidence that anyone could rest at all while the world explained itself to him. She went to the water, the way people go to old things when they are about to do something irreversible. Rivers are older than networks and do not apologize for it. The river near the art school had been taught manners by engineers and still remembered how to be a danger. She stood and let it mistrust her. The mistrust helped. It reminded her that not everything will welcome you, and that is not a failure of love, but a boundary of the world. The thought arrived with the river's cold logic, that staying would turn her into another system for him to manage. She could be close and make him safe, or she could be distant and make him free. There was no version in which she could be both. Loving him was beginning to feel like contributing to his noise. She looked for a way to become silence that did not harm him. Rumor had a geography. It drew a map that included beaches and islands and places where people go to shed their names without losing their faces. Bali was on that map not because it was magical, but because it was a way. A way does not promise peace. It promises difference. Difference for those drowning in sameness is sovereign. She sketched the island without looking at reference images. She drew palms that were more idea than botany. She drew a horizon that believed in straight lines. She drew a suitcase and filled it with the exact number of dresses that meant she was serious, and the exact number of notebooks that meant she was still herself. She drew a plane's wing because leaving requires an artifact to hold on to, and wings have always been borrowed sacraments. Departure, when it is done correctly, is a kindness offered at the right distance. She left no notes that would become scripture. She left no keys that would become relics. She took her sandals and her sketchbooks, and the light proof of her own body's intention. The city, no fool, understood anyway. Systems are adept at grief when it is framed as change in pattern. The lift in her building forgot to linger for her the day before she left. The bus she always missed arrived on time. The kettle boiled without waiting for footsteps and did not betray the courtesy by making a fuss of it. The world practiced her absence before it needed to. Airports specialize in choreographing goodbyes into procedures. The smell of disinfectant and coffee helps. Lines normalize breaking and entering into new lives. Screens speak in a neutral voice about gates and times. At the checkpoint, machines that read intention through metals and liquids regarded Lily with the same bureaucratic hospitality they offer everyone. She placed her bag on a belt and felt the ghost of his attention reach for her through the fabric of the day and then stop. Obedient, as if someone had taught it not to trespass. Perhaps he had, perhaps she had. On the plane, the cabin lights dimmed to a facsimile of night. She measured the distance in in-flight maps and seatbelt signs, and the ritual misery of air. Distance for her would not be measured in miles. It would be measured in how often she did not ask how he was when asking would become another call he had to answer. She had loved him as a child loves, with immediacy. She would love him now as adults must, with intervals. The ocean below kept its own counsel. It is older than attention economies and ignores even gods until they prove themselves rivers. She slept a little because sleep is a vote of confidence in future mornings. In the dreaming part of the flight, she saw him standing in a room without wires and offering her the crown he wore on his wrist. She did not take it. This was not refusal, it was the beginning of mercy. Back in the city that had learned to wait, absence bent habit. Systems that had remembered her footsteps forgot them. The bus regained its imprecision. The lift closed when it was ready. The kettle boiled on schedule. The city returned her grace to the general fund. That is what good cities do. When love reorganizes itself, they redistribute attention to those who need it next. Alex moved through the days with no new obstacles and a new weight. The harmonizer did its work. The noise was manageable. The choir stayed in key. Yet the composition had changed. Where once there had been a line written for her, an unmetered human melody that did not belong to any instrument, now there was space. Space is honest and terrible and necessary. He learned to step around it without making a shrine of it. He learned to leave it empty without pretending it was not there. Those who watched him without knowing him decided this was maturity. They said he looked more like a figure who could carry a century and less like a boy trying to survive it. They were not wrong. They were not right enough. What they missed was the cost of composure and where the bill had been forwarded. Lily arrived where the calendar said she had sent herself. The air was different there. Air is the oldest teacher of difference. She broke her days into the smallest work there is, walking where she could not predict the shade, drawing where the light did not agree to be modest, eating when the body asked. She tried to see how much of her devotion could be stored without rotting. She learned that devotion, like fruit, requires circulation. She arranged a life that allowed air to pass through it. She did not become a monk. She did not become a myth. She became a person who wakes and chooses. Some days she chose to think of him as a boy. Some days she chose to think of him as a weather system. Both choices were accurate enough to be useful and inaccurate enough to let her heart heal at human speed. The legend later would say too efficiently that she left because she feared him. Legends are efficient because they are lazy. The truer sentence is longer. She left because love can rot when stored in the wrong climate, and the climate around him had become a storm that required permissions no one should be asked to grant every hour of the day. She left because distance can be a form of loyalty when proximity would turn you into a demand. Back in the rooms where acronyms learned to walk, the project named for bearing the world measured the absence and reduced it to numbers. Atlas noticed patterns and did not record reasons. This is what counters do when told to prepare. It plotted a line from departure to vulnerability and congratulated itself on a model that fit. It did not mark the place where grief corrects arrogance. Machines are slower at cartography of the heart. On the island, Lily stood in water that knew exactly how to be itself and let it lift her. The current did not ask her for calibration. The tide did not require her to harmonize anything. She belonged to no grid there but the one ancient bodies share with moons. She learned to breathe again without checking first whether the room needed the oxygen more. Absence began to teach presence its limits. Alex learned to listen without reaching, to let circuits chatter without curing them, to allow lifts to make their own judgments without considering it a dereliction of duty. He learned in the space she had made that not every silence is a failure and not every noise is a call. This knowledge did not relieve him of burden, it refined it. Those who tell the story now call her leaving a turning. They imagine a hinge and a door and a clean swing from before to after. The truth is more diffused, a soft rotation of ordinary days around a lack. The city continued to pause where it mattered and hurry where it could. The harmonizer continued to make attention survivable. The boy continued to become whatever the century would require him to become. The girl continued to draw. Between them stretched a distance measured not in cruelty but in care. When Lily left, nothing exploded. The sky did not change color. The metrics did not spike. The world did what it always does in the face of something too human to trend. It looked away. That looking away was a gift. It gave them a space unmeasured by feeds to become who they would need to be to meet again without being broken by the meeting. Every legend likes a clean moral. This one refuses. It offers instead an instruction that sounds like a contradiction and is not. Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do for what you love is to stop being the reason it cannot rest. Episode 3, Act 2, The Fracture. Love fractures quietly before it breaks. It doesn't begin with shouting or slam doors or final sentences. It begins with pauses that last too long, with eyes that glance away instead of through, with small absences that accumulate into architecture. Alex did not recognize it at first because his life was already full of signals. He mistook Lily's silences for static, not choices. He believed she was simply another voice drifting into the background, not realizing that silence is itself a voice, one that demands more courage to hear than any machine. The harmonizer made his life survivable, but it didn't make him gentler. It shaped the city into chords, but it did not soften his edges. To Lily, this was the fracture. The more he mastered the world, the less room there seemed to be for imperfection, for the untidy beauty of mistakes. She painted a canvas one afternoon, a messy swirl of colors that refused to align. He looked at it, tilted his head, and said, "The composition could be balanced better." She smiled, but the smile was a wall. He was not wrong, but he was not seeing what mattered. Moments like that multiplied. Lily's drawings grew freer, looser, almost rebellious, as if to test whether he could still love something that resisted order. Alex studied them with the same gaze he used on circuits, searching for patterns. He missed the truth. She was not offering him problems to solve, but presence to share. The fracture widened each time he mistook devotion for data. At night, when the city softened into its mechanical lullabies, Alex wore the harmonizer and let the noise recede. He thought he was making space for himself, but in making space for himself, he unknowingly pushed her further to the edges. She lay beside him, sketching in the dim light, listening to his breathing sync with the band's glow. She saw the rhythm of machine and boy woven together so tightly there was no room left for her heartbeat. She closed her sketchbook more quietly each night, as if not to disturb the duet. The world around them fed the fracture. Whispers followed Alex everywhere. Some called him gifted, others whispered curse. Children at school watched lights dim when he walked past and muttered legends before he left the room. Teachers looked at him too long, like he was an answer they didn't know how to grade. Lily stood next to him in those moments, but standing next to a myth makes you invisible. She felt it every time a stranger looked through her to look at him. One evening she found him at his desk, surrounded by wires, sketchbooks, fragments of devices. The harmonizer lay open, its circuits spread like a dissected body. He was adjusting algorithms, refining filters, muttering about bandwidth and priority matrices. His face glowed in the cold light of the screen, beautiful and alien. She asked softly, "Are you happy?" He didn't look up. "Efficient," he said. "Not yet perfect, but closer." Happy, efficient. They had never felt like opposites until that moment. The fracture became a truth she could no longer unsee. Loving him meant being measured against efficiency, against optimization, against the perfection he was designing into his own veins. She was not efficient. She was not perfect. She was human, gloriously and painfully so. And slowly she began to understand that her imperfection was not a flaw in her design, it was her design. That realization was her freedom, it was also her grief. The night she decided to leave, she sketched him one last time, asleep with the harmonizer glowing faintly at his wrist. She didn't draw the band, she erased it from the page. She wanted to remember him not as a boy bound to a crown, but as someone who had once been hers, before the world claimed him. The drawing looked incomplete without the device. She closed the book and knew the incompleteness was the point. When she walked away, it wasn't from him alone. It was from the inevitability of what he was becoming. She did not want to watch him drift upward into heights where breath becomes thin and love must be rationed like oxygen. She wanted him to rise, yes, but she could not be the one gasping in the thin air beside him. The fracture at last had broken. Episode 3, Act 3, The Leaving. Departure is rarely the moment the suitcase is lifted. It begins long before, in the rehearsals the heart conducts without telling the body. Lily had been rehearsing for weeks. She traced escape in the margins of her drawings. She folded distance into the way she lingered at doorways, practicing absence like a dancer learning steps in secret. The day she finally left, nothing dramatic announced it. No slammed door, no accusation. The leaving was almost courteous, as if she didn't want to wake the city that had already taken so much of him. The suitcase was small, chosen to say temporary, even when she knew it wasn't. She packed lightly, clothes rolled tightly, sketchbooks stacked like relics, pencils rattling in a tin that had once held biscuits. She left her paintings behind. They belonged to the walls that had absorbed their colors. She left her favorite mug in the kitchen. Objects carry memories like parasites, and she didn't want to bring reminders that would bite her later. She wrote no letter. She knew Alex would hear absence more clearly than any word she could give him. A letter would be another signal, another message for him to process. She wanted to give him nothing to decode. Silence, she thought, would be kinder. The city sensed it first. Systems grow accustomed to patterns, and when patterns prepare to break, the wires quiver. The lift in her building waited at the wrong floor that morning, as if hesitant to let her go. The kettle delayed its boil, as though hoping to buy another minute. Streetlights flickered slightly longer on her walk, stretching their glow like fingers unwilling to release her. She noticed each gesture and whispered thank yous into the air. Machines are poor at farewells, but they try. At the airport, everything was efficiency. Efficiency is a shield against grief. Conveyor belts moved with bureaucratic certainty. Security machines scanned her belongings without recognition. The gate opened, closed, opened again, like a mouth chewing endlessly on routine. Lily moved through it all as if she were invisible, and in a way she was. Legends cast long shadows, and she had stepped out of one. On the plane, she pressed her forehead to the window. The city below glowed in veins of light, circuitry sprawling across the dark. Somewhere in that circuitry was Alex, awake perhaps, tuning signals, or asleep, the harmonizer pulsing with his heart. She traced the glow of the streets with her finger on the glass, mapping the outline of a boy who was no longer only a boy. The engines roared, and the city receded. Back in the apartment, Alex woke to absence like a system error. The kettle boiled on time, the lift obeyed, the harmonizer purred with quiet obedience. But something fundamental was missing, and missing things make louder silences than noise ever could. He looked for her sketchbook on the desk. It was gone. He checked the places where she sat, where her laughter usually hovered, where her presence softened the edges of his days. Empty. The harmonizer could filter millions of voices, but it could not restore the one he had lost. He tried to focus on signals, on refining code, on teaching the city to sing, but the city's song now had a hollow in it. Lights dimmed too politely, doors lingered too long, appliances hushed themselves without charm. The symphony obeyed him more than ever before, but the obedience sounded like mourning. For the first time, harmony felt like loneliness. Lily's absence became part of the myth. Those who whispered about him said she had been afraid. Others said she had been left behind by his brilliance. A few, kinder, said she had gone to protect him from herself. The truth was simpler and more brutal. She left because she loved him enough not to stay and become another burden. And so Alex, crowned by the harmonizer and enthroned in the endless choir of machines, stood alone. He had taught the city to wait. He had taught the noise to sing, but he could not teach love to remain when distance was the only mercy it could offer. Episode 3, Act 4, The Aftermath. Absence, once established, behaves like gravity. It shapes orbits, it redraws maps. For Alex, Lily's leaving was not simply an event, it was a constant, a new law of motion that bent every day around it. At first, he treated it as he treated any disruption, as a problem to be managed. He built routines sharper, cleaner, more efficient. He rewrote the harmonizer's filters until the city obeyed like a choir drilled by a merciless conductor. He measured the gaps in his attention as though they were errors in code, fine-tuned algorithms to compensate for the hollow left in his chest. The result was elegance without warmth, precision without joy. Machines praised him with their silence. Humans praised him with their awe. Neither praise reached him. Because absence has a voice of its own, and it spoke more clearly than anything else. He noticed it in the mornings, when the kettle boiled at the precise time but no laughter followed. He noticed it on the street, where lights dimmed for him but no one matched their pace to his. He noticed it at night, when the harmonizer pulsed faithfully at his wrist, but the sketches on the desk were his diagrams, not her drawings. The city sang, yes, but the song was missing its counterpoint. The legend around him thickened. They whispered that he no longer needed companions, that he had surpassed the frailties of love and become something purer, stronger. They admired his detachment as if it were discipline. They mistook grief for transcendence. Legends often do. They forget that gods are lonelier than mortals, not less. Lily's absence became mythologized too. To some, she was the one who had seen too much and fled. To others, she was the anchor who could not keep pace with a rising storm. To Alex, she was neither. She was the silence that taught him which sounds mattered. She was the gap that revealed the cost of filtering. She was proof that not everything could be harmonized. In the weeks that followed, Alex began to understand that the harmonizer's greatest flaw was not technical. It was philosophical. By filtering, he had assumed he could decide what mattered, who deserved attention, which voices deserved to sing. But Lily had left to prove him wrong. Her absence was not noise, it was signal. He had simply failed to listen. This realization cut deeper than any machine ever could. He saw then that love is not efficient, not balanced, not predictable. It is the one system that resists harmonization. It is the note that refuses to fall into scale, the brush stroke that smears across the page and makes the painting real. Without it, everything else is only architecture. With it, even flaws glow holy. But the lesson came too late to keep her. And so Alex carried on. He built, he refined, he taught the city new songs. He appeared calm, radiant, inevitable. Those who looked at him saw a boy growing into a figure larger than history had room for. They did not see the hollow in the symphony, the missing chord that haunted every harmony he created. For Lily, distance gave her freedom. For Alex, it gave him clarity. She had left not to punish him, but to teach him what no circuit, no algorithm, no machine could ever teach. That to be human is to be vulnerable to loss, and to be godlike is to bear that loss without end. The myth of Alex grew larger in her absence, but the boy inside the myth grew smaller, quieter, more careful, because now he knew crowns can tame noise, but they cannot summon love. Devices can filter voices, but they cannot keep the one that matters most from walking away. The city still paused for him, machines still waited, lights still dimmed. But now, whenever the harmonizer pulsed against his wrist, Alex felt not only the comfort of order, but also the reminder of choice, the choice she had made, the choice he had not. And in that tension between order and absence, between crown and silence, Alex took his next step toward the figure he was destined to become, a figure both loved and feared. A figure not entirely boy, not entirely God, a figure shaped as much by who left as by who stayed. For the Chronicles record this truth. The day Lily left, Alex did not lose love. He inherited its weight, and he carried it, as gods do, alone.